Hi there, and welcome to episode 65 of the Analyst Brief podcast brought to you by the Cyber Hut. My name is Simon Moffatt, founder at the Cyber Hut, and with me as ever is co-host Mr. David Mahdi. David, how are we doing?
Hello, Simon. I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Just in the midst of the autumnal conference season, as we always are, which is always good. You always get to hop around and do various different, either presenting or doing panels or just turning up and drinking tea. That's always nice for me. So a few more conferences added in, which weren't part of my planning, but it's always good to have a few spontaneous events in the offing. What about yourself? You've been around, you've been traveling around and seeing people and doing things.
Yeah, it's been good. I mean, since we kind of started picking these back up. I mean, obviously there was Black Hat back in August. There was Authenticate, which was fantastic. A lot of identity folks there, but it's great to see that community and certainly developments and use cases of passkeys and where we're going with all that. And then last week, just came back from Austin. For the Forrester security event. So it's always great to see some of those folks like Andrash, Heidi Shea, Ali Mellon, and Sandy Shirelli covering, topics like obviously agentic AI was a big topic there. Identity as well. How do you deal with identity in agentic world, like from the going through the full life cycle? And then Sandy had some great stuff on PQC and crypto agility, because in the end, that's the critical foundation that's under all of this stuff. That the identity market doesn't focus on it, but should definitely pay attention to it because it's it's certainly there. So. It was all good. And like you said, just shaping up for kind of the next round. I mean, here in the US, we've got Thanksgiving coming up, so mad press before then. After that, there's the Gartner Identity and Access Management Summit, which I wish they had it a little bit earlier. It's dipping a little bit too deep into December for my preference, but
the Christmas trees will be up.
That's the issue, right? And it's like, it kind of gets in the way of a little bit of shopping, for the family. And, but c'est la vie. It's the world we live in, right, Simon?
It is. It actually clashes with the Black Hat Europe. Actually, this is exactly the same week. I think it's
okay.
December, so I'll be doing that one. But fortunately, that's obviously in the UK, which is slightly easier.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
I always do the Black Hat one. So I've got the Future Identity event this week in the UK.
Oh yeah, I did see you promoting that on LinkedIn.
It's a nice conference. There's a bit of financial services and fintech and evolving payments, frauds, and obviously there's a dedicated identity stage in there as well. So I'm doing a couple of panels on cloud.
That's really good.
Cloud's never solved, is it? Cloud is a growing, evolving thing, and obviously non-human identity in there as well. And next week, I'm at the CSEC Live event, which is the UK's Chartered Institute of Information Security. It's more of a CISO focus on that one. So
it sounds
CISO,
fancy.
It's quite. I'm a fellow on the Chartered Institute, but it's more security focused, and it's definitely more strategic security. So CISOs and looking at things like risk and how security is evolving and so on. Lots of practitioners there, which is good. And then obviously into Black Hat into December, which is more of that security research thing. But Black Hat being around for a long time. Every year, there's definitely more and more identity research being released, whether it's whatever NHI workload, agentic is obviously now more popular. But you mentioned PQC, then there's definitely obviously a lot of crypto research gets released at Black Hat and sort of data security stuff. And if you look at that now, that's all foundational upon identity. It always assumes identity is working effectively. So that's always good to see. So there's lots going on. But I want to start, actually, I don't know whether it's the autumnal season for acquisitions and funding. We always touch on fundings and purchasing and things. But we're going to start with funding first of all, and then we're going to head into 2 or 3 different acquisitions that had closed in the past sort of week, 10 days or so. The first funding round I want to cover is for an organization called Conductor One. Been around for quite a while, looking at the sort of cloud identity governance lens. So taking the classic IGA set of problems, access review, access request, service accounts and humans in there as well, and sort of provisioning and fulfillment layer. It always needs improving and evolving and changing, and they've been on that mission for a few years, and they've just had a very healthy Series B round. So that's quite a big chunk of change, I guess, in the sort of current economic global turmoil. Looking at this week's mystical quartet, I should say. So I guess it's an interesting one. This is coming in a strategic entry, as you would expect. So $79 million. If we look at the release for that, obviously they're looking at. Well, there's a few things looking at which sort of noticed for me. One is this vision around identity sprawl. Existing identity tools are fragmented. We have all this issue around sort of trying to get identity tools integrated, talking with each other, be that PAM or the downstream systems. You have all of that isolation around data, I guess, not flowing where it should be. And they've obviously changed that narrative a little bit to now say, look, we can look at this fragmentation for humans and clearly non-humans as well. So looking to, unify IGA, a few little PAM comments in there as well, pulling on that security aspect, looking at the press release in there as well. So it's a strategic thing, looking to expand, looking to improve IGA for seemingly looks like people and non-humans as well, obviously the agentic side. So congratulations to them, to Alex, Bovey and the team there. It's a nice amount of cash.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, congrats to Alex and the team. I think it's a really good timing, especially in the market and what they've been focused on. You and I both know, just obviously focusing on identity, that the areas that they cover are just been, blind spots in the organization. And I think while a lot of identity security folks have known of this, I think the market now, unfortunately / fortunately, has enough evidence to show like, hey, we need solutions like Conductor One. They are going to offer us value, but specifically to help mitigate, identity related issues and governance, access sprawl, and really all of it. And just, as you were talking, I just kind of opened up some of the stuff. So it looks like it was led by Greycroft with also CrowdStrike, their Falcon Fund, and some of their existing vendors from Excel and Felicis. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly, but interesting to see, with certainly CrowdStrike involved there. They obviously have a very good lens in the market with respect to cybersecurity. They acquired Preempt, I think, a couple of years ago, doing some stuff there in the identity world. I know I covered them when I was an analyst. And so it's really interesting to see on the endpoint security side, them mirroring it up, which frankly, I always say, like, it's about time.
Jordan, no, yeah, exactly right. It's good to see. I think it's IGA is a funny one in the sense of you talk about the problem description being quite well understood, and it is. But I think what's happened is it's just got larger. The problem statement has grown, and by this I mean we have got non-human, but we also have things like SaaS systems as well. So by this, it's not just those high-risk core regulated, FinServe or payment apps or high-risk systems which cover the IGA sort of lens. It's suddenly saying, okay, well, that's good. And we have streamlined join and move a lever, provisioning, access request, access review, maybe some legacy RBAC or whatever. But actually, those core principles we want now to apply to all of our SaaS systems as well, and all of our cloud, whether it's SaaS or sort of PaaS or whatever. So you suddenly want to have those core principles, and you want to expand it. So it isn't just about the top 10 apps. It's actually every app we have should have a access request, access removal mechanism, hopefully trying to move towards something like sort of just-in-time access request and zero standing privileges and these sorts of buzzwords. But it's really hard to get that stuff in place. And I think you suddenly then add in agentic and non-human and service accounts, and they all need governance. And it's like we haven't fixed this for humans yet, and we've got to suddenly do it for more. So I think it's fair players like to conduct one because it's the problem statement is getting bigger, and you need to have I think a slightly different approach, which is obviously what they're trying to do with the sort of cloud native thing there. So good chunk of change, good. I'm sure they'll be spending that on multiple things: engineering, marketing, outreach, and other. So congratulations to them. And it's interesting sort of CrowdStrike angle. Certainly they've been around for a long time from that sort of security perspective or the cyber network sort of perspective there. But obviously they do the Falcon stuff, which has that identity lens, and they are looking at how identity can play a part in things like XDR and that different view, that different sort of entry point into identity there, which is highly complementary to things like IGA as well, which is more on the sort of identity data layer.
Because I know we have some other topics. Let me ask you a very quick question, but interested in hearing your thoughts. Do you think the Palo CyberArk acquisition maybe influenced CrowdStrike to say maybe we should invest in this so we get a front row seat?
Ooh, that's a good one. Possibly. I don't think any of these decisions operate in sort of isolation, and by that I mean, if an acquisition takes place, that leaves behind certain things, it creates opportunities for certain things. But as we've said multiple times on the podcast, I think there's this overlap or this increasing relation between security and identity. And if you look at the sort of the legacy network investment area, which would have been, firewalls and switches, on-prem data center stuff, which is sort of moved to this software-defined networking, SASE, and I guess ultimately zero trust, that budget is translating into sort of different areas. And you start saying, well, okay, we don't have to manage Wi-Fi routers and firewalls and all that stuff anymore, but we do need to manage the endpoint, and the endpoint is going to maybe attached to a public network and resources are in the cloud, whatever else. So then you start to say, well, we need endpoint, increased emphasis on the endpoint there. So you talk about both MDM and standard sort of XDR, EDR stuff, but then that ultimately resolves to identity. So it's like on one hand, 100%. You've got this sort of device-led identity stuff coming in, but obviously we're all looking at identity from our traditional lens of whatever IGA, PAM, IDP sort of stuff. So to answer your question, I don't know in honesty. I think the Palo into PAM is fascinating, interesting, almost a natural progression. I think CrowdStrike have been adding in and developing their identity plan. This is, I guess, a slightly different sort of level of that. But then, like Cisco as well, they've changed their narrative to talk about identity intelligence, and there have been a few acquisitions over the years as well. So all of those guys are all sort of looking at identity almost from an outside-in point of view. And obviously, you have dedicated identity vendors building out this fabric or a platform of identity services, which is more, I guess, inside out, if you like. And your Oktas and your Pings and these sort of legacy guys are trying to integrate more into other areas, aren't they? Trying to sort of pull in risk signals and the like, and trying to sort of push identity outwards. And it's a cool place to be, I think.
It is interesting, and I know on our podcast we've talked about kind of the world of, to put it simply, right, your cybersecurity platforms on one side, and let's say the identity platforms on the other, and you can see the identity platform starting to realize again finally that it really is about security, right? They were all built on productivity, right? And we've talked about joiner mover leaver. But joiner mover leaver adversary is what they need to focus on. And with ITDR coming into their space, I think they're doing that. But you've got entrants that go back some time, but like your Silverforts and others that took that identity security kind of angle early on, and Sempris and some others, right? Slightly different angle. But then you've got the cybersecurity platforms like your CrowdStrikes, like your Palos, and your Ciscos, right, as well. And so it's really interesting to kind of, it definitely feels like that Venn diagram is 100%. The circles are coming in closer and closer together. And frankly, it's like, we've talked about it as well in the podcast. It's like attackers don't care. They don't care if something's segmented in the authentication space, or it's IGA or it's a EDR or MDR. They don't care. They're going to just break it either way. And so I think that's why inevitably these tools they just need to be interconnected better. And if, you've got a great mousetrap that happens to be a great, identity onboarding solution or access management solution, okay, fine, as long as it does a really good job interconnecting with your CrowdStrikes and your Palos and others. So, but I think that's something, Simon, I know you and I, as we cover the market, I'm sure we'll see more evidence and investments and other things that might kind of illustrate that more. But I think we're quite a ways away from a true single vendor being able to cover every aspect.
I don't think that's definitely not quite there yet. I think there are some interesting other problems to add into that. I think one is the sort of metrics of this as well. We've talked about this a little bit in the past around.
Okay.
It's easy to sort of rebrand yourself and say, oh yeah, we do identity security. It's like, okay, well, who are you selling to? How do you measure success? Is it are you very verbose in your sort of micro attack discussion and benefits, and how you can add value into that type of conversation, be it sort of security operations or security architecture and the CIA triad, and can talk about stride and threat modeling and other. And I think if you can, brilliant, you're on the right track and you're going to have a very different audience. If you can't, and you're still talking about identity lingua franca and how that operates, OAuth 2 and SAML stuff, that's equally fine, but that's a very different thing. It's almost a sort of chalk and cheese type of conversation. So I think that is one. I think the bidirectional integrations will continue. I think that isn't complete yet by any stretch. I think industry needs to sort of mature in there as well. And by that, I mean the architectures of your sort of mid to large enterprise, how they see identity, how they consume it, how they integrate it, how they measure it. And I think there's a lot of legacy problems, I guess, still need to disappear. Things like passwords and crappy access review processes and a lot of stuff which may hopefully die on the vine, as they say, may become obsolete with AI and other things, where you don't need to solve those problems actually, because those problems are going to disappear, hopefully. And we're going to see sort of slightly different design paradigm around what identity does, who it integrates with, how you measure success and other. Look, I think it's a good move for Conductor One. They're going to continue to grow. It's clearly a big addressable market. Even the traditional IGA market is big, and there's plenty of room for disruption there. But I think if they're looking at agentic, NHI, and maybe some orthogonal technology integrations as well, it's an interesting play.
I think that is definitely, I think agentic for many is going to be the forcing factor that's starting to become clear. I mean, they're all using the messaging, and I think that's good. But the frustrating thing, again, just kind of coming back from Forrester and some of the other kind of conversations I've had with security leaders and IT leaders, so like CIOs and CISOs and other roles, I think we all agree that the marketing buzz is a little bit wacky, as it always is. When we go back years, it's like cloud, it's mobile, it's blockchain. But I think that like here we have an idea of the value of all these agents. I think the issue is security as a whole, and one of the things that I don't want to kind of go down this path right now, because I know we want to kind of get into some other topics, but just as I sketched down, Simon, as you were talking, when I think about a lot of the cybersecurity platforms, to me, they all focus on workforce security, right? So primarily protecting the company network, protecting the company assets, and protecting the employees that have that direct access to those assets. But then when you think about the fraud prevention market, they didn't really your BioCatches of the world, your Lexus of the world, and so on. They focus on consumer security, right? Providing fraud detection tools to mostly fintechs and financial services, but obviously e-commerce and retailers and others nowadays, to detect bots, to detect different types of things. They didn't sell to the enterprise, so those vendors were kind of like not really even seen in the same atmosphere really is your like CrowdStrikes and Cisco's. And then you have like identity vendors. So your Pings, your Oktas, your IBMs, your Talus, your Entrust, your Transmits, you name it, and so on. And CyberArk is in there too. Some of them, when they go PAM, if you're going PAM, you're pretty much all in on workforce, right? If you're holistic, like a Ping or an Okta, right? Like they're going to sell to workforce, customer, and partner. And so what I find really interesting that while those Venn diagrams are coming together, it seems to be the intersection points are anything related to employee security or workforce, protecting workforce assets, right? And then that, I think, kind of segues into your machine identities, non-human identities, and kind of your agents, right? And again, it's primarily protecting that. So I think the interesting question is, what's going to happen to the other segments? In the future, is like a Palo Alto going to, be dominant in workforce stuff? I mean, maybe dominant is not the right word, but be able to command market share and enterprise related stuff. So your workforce and your workforce assets, but are they going to even bother looking at customer stuff and partner stuff? Right. Now, what I would say about that is actually at CrowdStrike Falcon last year, I gave a presentation on really the ecosystem, is that you're only as strong as your weakest link in the ecosystem. And the ecosystem is employees, partners, and customers. And if a customer can be compromised, via a customer identity system, we've seen that. And one of the slides I had was a blog from CrowdStrike, which showed ForgeRock OpenAM that was used at a big telco. And there's a blog on this that's all posted. And one of the attack patterns was they went after the ForgeRock OpenAM, and this was like in 2021, and they are 22, sorry, and they found a 1-year-old vulnerability, some CVE that was a 1-year-old, and the system wasn't patched, and they used that to then get in on the customer identity system. So it's like they compromised the customer identity system, and then they use that to then get into eventually AWS and do identity manipulation. And then they can do a variety of different things. Now they can get to your SIM systems, they can get to your employees, they can deploy ransomware, they can do a whole number of things. And again, much like my previous comment, attackers don't really care what market segment these tools are in. It's irrelevant to them. They also don't care if you're an employee, a partner, or a customer. They're going to use any of those means to get in. So I don't know. It's a bigger question for the industry, but I think frankly, it's the go-to-market, in my opinion, that has led the building of these tools, which I totally get. We have to sell the technology for the vendors to make money. Totally get it. But at the same time, it's kind of like not really thinking about what the overall goal is here. And the overall goal is to try and protect the whole organization versus like, oh, well, who cares about like customer stuff? That's like someone else's problem. But I'll just protect the employees like really, really well. And it's like, well, again, in that case of that MNO and the BPO in that CrowdStrike blog, it's clearly demonstrated that you can use customer identity systems and identities themselves to attack the overall company and frankly get in, right? So anyway, totally will bring us side rail us, but I'll stop there.
I'll unpick that rapidly. And I think
absolutely, go for it. Yeah,
both B2B and B2C. Being bold here, they are the legacy constructs, and they are constructs that come around based on perimeter-based thinking, right? So everyone goes, "Oh, well,
legacy constructs, key term. I like that." Yep.
The network's dead. Everything is identity-centric, zero trust, all this stuff. Maybe some organizations have got there, and they are doing zero trust effectively. If I'm honest, I don't see many, and I do a lot of workshops. So maybe you do have that, right? And that's great. But you're still thinking in silos, in building blocks, in your legacy identity vendors who talk about IDPs, they talk about single sign-on, all this sort of stuff. It's like you're creating more pillars. Ergo, you then start to see secondary markets for things like ISPM, ITDR, and other things. Now, just zoom out for a second, and let's just assume there is no perimeters, and what is the core thing the organization wants to protect, right? And it's probably going to be a few things. One, intellectual property. B, customer information, but really it only does that because of regulation. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't do that effectively. We know this.
Yep.
Employees are important, and by that I mean you don't want to lose your employees because they are an asset. Human capital is an asset. So there aren't many core things in there really that need to be thought about in different terms. So if you think about data as the main thing that you want to protect, right, and you want to put your controls around that data as close to that as possible. And I'm talking about, maybe it's encrypted, maybe it's sharded or protected or whatever it can be. You want to then have, I guess, this extended, you have lots of different concentric rings around the data, defensive depth, all this sort of stuff. And once you start to think about what those core assets are, whether the identity is a member of staff or whether it's an agent operating on the member of staff's behalf, or whether it's a supply chain, or whether it's a customer, or whether it's a supply chain operating on behalf of the customer elsewhere, these are all just concentric rings that are further and further away from the asset that needs to be protected. Now, if you just sort of think in those very, very basic terms on a whiteboard and you could start from scratch, you probably wouldn't be sitting there buying sort of B2E pillars of identity, or you wouldn't be buying PAM, or you wouldn't be buying whatever. You'd be saying, right, I've got some data. What do I need for that? I want confidentiality protection. I want protection from unauthorized access. I want integrity protection. All basic, cyber building blocks from your security 101 masters. How would you do that in the modern world? And whether the identity is a member of staff working as an admin doing some stuff, or it's a supply chain 5, 6, 7 suppliers deep that happens to find vulnerability and happens to come through. And we've seen loads of really powerful supply chain attacks over the years, or it could be a bit of employee fraud, or maybe it's customer fraud. Like all of that, if you go back to the first principles and you start to think in those sorts of terms, you then get back to this point of view saying, right, okay, we need attribution, we need biometric authentication, we need to have behavior analysis, you need to have intent analysis, you need to have runtime monitoring. And you start to move away from all of these sort of trust assumptions that we make. Ergo, why zero trust is struggling still to be implemented. So we all have these assumptions around, we've got MFA, we're fine, or we've got PDP, it's fine. So you break all that stuff down and you start to think, well, okay, what are the core things I need to protect? What do I need to protect them with? And you end up in a very different sort of playing field. I think we're a few years away from this, but my hope is we are starting to see, the security metrics being applied to identity sort of getting more match fit, if you like. And we're talking about just in time and zero standing privileges. We're talking about threat detection and response, and we're talking about integration with MITRE and all that sort of stuff. So identity is sort of getting leaner and sharper, and all of the things like agentic, and maybe in another couple of years' time there'll be some other new thing we have to manage. But it's not going to be such a huge, big, oh my God, shock horror moment. How do we authenticate these things? How do we authorize these things? We need to redesign everything. It's like you need to move away from just thinking about Auth2 and Open Connect and these little pillars of stuff. You need to just be a bit more ambitious and think about first principles.
Exactly. And I think this is an amazing dialogue. And I think the other aspect too, again, is, you mentioned CI, but there's A as well. We have EU DORA, which is the Cyber Resilience Act. And that's another aspect of all of this. I mean, I was talking to a security leader last week, and they were just asking my advice because they were just recently breached. And, all those aspects that you mentioned, right? Protecting the data, the IP, the employees, the customers, like all of that stuff was a huge concern. And the CFO was there when I was talking to them. But actually, in a lot of ways, they spent more time talking about the outage in itself, like, and how it took them offline, right? In order for them to ensure that they could get back online in a good, like, clean state and they're not compromised anymore. And so I think we're going to see more regulations on resilience, and that's just going to make it a lot harder as well, because not only do we need to have that confidentiality and the integrity, but the availability. And you could argue availability too is also like who is accessing all this stuff as well at the same time. But certainly
100%.
with... Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I think availability isn't just about stuff being online, is it? We talk about sort of failover and DR, but there's a whole sort of tiering of availability. And you've got likes of Accent, Mighty ID, Strata. They're all looking at availability at multiple parts of that stack as well, not just about sort of IDP redirection, but it's all about making applications and systems available in different ways and being able to layer that stuff. So I agree. I think it's good. I think it's definitely part of a bigger journey. Let us just move on just a little bit, just to close off the funding for a sec. We've sort of separated a little bit with what we've been talking about there for a sec. So there's been another funding round. Organisation called Wide Field has entered the fray, sort of come out stealthy, I guess, and they've had a Series A round. So that's their sort of first forays into the funding aspect. Been on a couple of years, but again, they're looking at this sort of thing we've just been talking about. They're talking about, even with well-funded security budgets, all these platforms, IGA, PAM, sort of IDP, MFA stuff, there's disconnection, there's fragmentation. You don't have visibility, I think, in there as well, and they're looking at stuff, looking at from get visibility and look at that end-to-end view of what isn't happening. So coming out stealth, I guess it's early for them, but I think they're tackling a problem which is, I think there's quite a few vendors are looking at doing. But shout out to them, again, another way of sort of, again, closing the gaps, looking at SaaS, looking at all the interactions, looking at post-authentication. They mentioned agents, I think, as they have to do. But it's early for them, I guess. But, another vendor to help us in this journey to improve our identity security landscape there. So nobody got any comments on that, but it's just another shout out for them just to help them on their journey to improve the identity security world. Acquisitions, right? Funding's great, and we love funding. We also love acquisitions, right? Acquisitions are juicy sorts of stuff. You mentioned Palo Alto, CyberArk. That was a big one that happened a few months ago. But there's been a few others. About 4, I think I can count. That have happened recently. I'm going to start with. Let me pull this one up here. I'm going to start with Twilio now. Twilio have been around for a long time. I guess they sort of started offering, it's more like the sort of in the sort of B2C messaging, email-y, message integration, SMS world, I suppose, quite a while ago. But they're mostly doing a hell of a lot more than that these days. And they have gone into an acquisition or intent to acquire a week or two back with an organisation called Stitch. Stitch with a STYTCH, which doesn't help SEO, I guess, if you're thinking of stitching and sewing and things. But Twilio entered into an agreement to acquire Stitch, and Stitch now describe themselves as an identity platform for AI agents, which is quite cute, I guess, in the popularity of AI agents. I mean, Stitch, I think historically, and if you look at their website, was more about the sort of B2C building blocks, authentication, fraud, skim, sort of dev-centric way of interacting with external users ultimately. And obviously, clearly the last, 12, 18 months, AI agents, as we know, has become more attractive, I guess, ultimately. So Twilio slurped up Stitch. That's interesting. Again, we talk about security in identity, but this is obviously identity going out into a slightly different area there, very complementary, I think, to what Twilio are up to. Your initial sort of thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really interesting. I mean, you can see the title. If the title is indicative of anything, if you scroll all the way back to the top, Simon, customer engagement. So they're focused on the customer, and obviously, I think Simon, you and I agree on that. I mean, when you think about it, I just switched phone carriers. I mean, the first steps that they do is like they want to know your identity. They want to know who you are. That not just someone coming in creating a fake account, right? But beyond that, this particular carrier is like, oh yeah, go in and sign up and get this ID right away and download the app, and you'll get all these like loyalty program stuff and all these discounts and all that. And it was actually pretty cool. But the whole notion is that not only from a security and fraud perspective, do they want to know my identity, right? Because they also have to. But at the same time, they're like, maybe we can also manage this customer's life cycle, that in theory, I can get an idea about, are they happy? Are they not happy? Are they going to leave? Are they, ripe for maybe like promoting a new device or a new service, right? Or what location are they in? Oh, hey, we have internet over there and they're not a customer of internet. Maybe we should promote them, right? So identity and loyalty obviously cross over, and I can see them with that. On the agent side, I think in our last conversation, and I've been doing a lot of research and I'm writing a paper right now on AI browsers, right? We just have to try and finish it already. But and in the meantime, since I've been writing it, there's all these security issues coming out, which is like, yeah, well, duh, no surprise. But that's the other thing too. I mean, customers are going to be using their AI agents embedded into their mobile systems, their own apps, and even just your native functionality, whether it's, and I'm not going to say any of these because it'll trigger 50 of my devices, but the popular names of the devices that we have, though that agentic tech is coming in much more into these platforms. And even when I was meeting with Forrester last week, we talked about this and simply just, really like how it actually impacts the customer behavior. It is dramatically going to change customer behavior. And so I think Twilio making this move with Stitch, it looks like the focus is enabling companies to build this stuff out so they can embrace this new customer engagement shift and customer behavior shift. But we'll see how they execute on it. As always, Simon, that's how these things always go, right?
No, of course. Look, acquisition is never easy. It's very good to do a press release with the right buzz. Of course, you've got two teams to integrate. You've got to go to market. There's probably overlapping customers. There's a lot to unpick. I think there's a couple of things for me which is interesting. One is, we skipped over the word trust there. Building trust in the age of AI. So that's quite a heavy,
right. I did skip that.
Loaded term. And when I did my book on consumer identity, it was an age ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, I guess. And trust was a big part of that. There's a lot of trust research there, and it's you've got the trust between the customer and the service, but also reverse trust from the service to the consumer or prospect. You have to build this. Are they anonymous? Are they malicious? Are they automated, etc.? So there's a two-way thing there, and there's a lot of interesting economics behind building trust, two-way trust there. So they've just thrown this building trust in the AI world, or whatever they put there in the age of AI. So it's interesting there around, you're talking about customer authentication, customer fraud, engagement, and all that bi-directional stuff there, which is good. I think the AI extension of that, of course, is, well, there's a few things. I mean, is it the service provider using AI as part of that engagement mechanism? It probably is, isn't it? It's going to be the extension of the sort of chatbot world, and maybe using sort of augmentation both in the physical and digital world to get the customer the information they need, helping them search things, find things, build relationships, etc. So there's part of it that way, but obviously there's trust the other way as well. So it's the service provider understanding the customer prospect in detail. So I think there's a lot of subtlety there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a key point, right? When you double click, you mentioned zero trust earlier in our previous conversation, but I think actually it's one of the reasons why zero trust, I think, hasn't really picked up. I think I'm a fan of its fundamentals, but in itself, it's kind of a silly term because nothing can happen if you have zero trust, right? If I don't trust a UK passport that you're handing me and I'm a US border agent, like, nothing's going to happen, right? So I think while it's a buzzy term, when you double click on zero trust, really what zero trust is all about is building, establishing, and maintaining trust with any entity, right? Whether it's a device, piece of software, a human, a customer, a partner, you name it. If it's something that is going to be like, relationship that's going to last for a while, that's one thing. If it's something that's ephemeral, workload, an agent in this case, whatever. So absolutely, yeah. Like digital trust right, has a connection to zero trust, and that don't just trust something, like bring it on, do something to build up trust. With humans, we have identity verification. Right. So I was actually talking to Forrester about that last week, because we were like, how are we going to effectively, they didn't use these terms, but more or less, we got in a really good dialogue about building trust in an AI age. So absolutely, I think they're saying all the right things here. I'm going to be very interested to see what they do next, right? So, like you said, the press releases are great, but the hard work is going to come on, one, the integration, and two, when we see the evidence and the proof points in the market of people actually using this. I'd love to see them say many, many months down the road, hey, this is going on. The one thing I will say is, when you look at Stitch and what they do, they almost kind of seem, and argue with me, Simon, I'd love it if I'm wrong here, but to me, my view is like they felt like they were trying to be like Auth0, and even like Dscope in a sense, right? Where they're just going after the developer and going API first, SDKs, everything else, but maybe lean in on this kind of new era and age. And it's almost like, your Twilio has been around for some time, and much like Okta, right? Even though they have customer identity, and they still do today, that product still is there. I just still talk to lots of customers that have the, Okta SIAM, if you will. But what was interesting at the Authenticate conference was Okta had a lot of folks there, and there's some great people that I know and good friends from Okta that were there, and they were wearing Okta shirts with the Okta brand. But what was interesting was the booth they had there was an Auth0 booth and Auth0 branding, right? So I think they recognize that, like, hey, the developer is still key in this relationship, and Twilio's always had some kind of avenue that way. So anyway, I'm just kind of pointing out the fact that it feels like an Okta Auth0 type scenario, where it's like Twilio and Stitch here, and trying to lean in on developers to say, hey, developers are comfortable with these platforms as they're building out agentic capabilities for their companies and their customers. We want them to come to us. And what I'll just say here, because I know it's not a part of our list today, but I know at Octane, that was a big topic. And I have seen the branding from Okta where they're like, we secure AI. I think that's the term, if I'm mistaken, but I feel like I saw that somewhere. Maybe I was watching F1 and I saw like Okta, we secure AI or something like that. And I was like, you do? That's interesting, because you didn't say that like 3 months ago, and suddenly you're saying that now. But anyway, I'm making fun here, but I think it's aspirational right now, I think. But this is interesting.
No, I agree with most of that. I think it's definitely. I think SIAM has always had that developer thing around. Each SIAM deployment is going to be different. You've got lots of different flexible touch points with the customer. And look, it's not a customer. Look, the customer is a sliding scale there of anonymous to a prospect to an existing customer, a returning customer. So there's lots of things that have to happen. There's lots of different touch points, be it mobile, online, etc. So you need to have, not necessarily build your own, but clearly you have to have that ability to deliver a specific, whether it's a mobile app or a set of interactions or journeys. So hence there is that ability to be focusing on the dev, which I think is pretty common now. I think I definitely agree around, I think it's complementary. I think the AI thing, we're still early in this journey. I know things are moving rapidly, but I think if you get 100 agentic AI deployments, you will get 100 different AI agentic deployments. And by that, I mean the sort of design patterns, the controls, etc. Yeah. So that is still maturing there. So I think it's good. I think it's complementary. I think I probably wouldn't put Stitch in the same size or brand as Auth0. I think yes,
no,
similar as in sort of developer space. But
that's all I meant. That's all I meant. Not a comparison and like the revenue or this, that, and the other. I
don't know whether the brand will be kept separate or not. Time will tell on that one. But it's good, interesting. Again, it's another sort of complementary orthogonal move. No, nothing too surprising there. Alrighty, let us skip on a little bit to another acquisition. Good friends at Ping Identity. disclaimer for those who don't know, I was at ForgeRock for 9 years, which is,
Yeah,
I guess it was
yeah.
ForgeRock, but so a lot of similar people there. And so Keyless, they're quite intent, again, signing agreements to potentially acquire Keyless, I guess, in the coming months, as and when paperwork gets sorted out. So Keyless, London-based, currently is London-based, and they've got a very interesting take on the sort of biometric auth view with a thing called zero knowledge biometrics, which is all about essentially not having a single sort of location for the biometric template. Ultimately, it gets cleverly distributed in different locations, and it's some nice crypto stuff going on there. And it's, again, it's taking something like biometric, which we've been using for a long, long time, natively on mobile, but this is really looking at more of a specialist approach to biometry, making that slightly more flexible, again, mobile centric, but the way it's stored is very, very different there. So I think ultimately that's different, that's new, that's an interesting thing. They've been going on a couple of years. They've been in and out of SIFT, I think, from memory. So SIFT, the fraud platform, I think they'd had a bit of a interaction with them. I think they've got spun back out of that. So they've, complementary again to Ping, obviously Ping and ForgeRock. They've got lots and lots and lots of different authentication partnerships out there, both for B2C and B2E. Clearly, this is, I guess, going to change that landscape a little bit. See what else is in the press release here, which is, it doesn't really say. Also got Andre Duran there. So, joining forces, we aim to make privacy preserving auth as simple as possible, or simple as a glance, which is interesting. Again, trust is mentioned there. So Andrea there, the CEO of Keyless, trust lies at the heart of every digital relationship. So they're looking to embed trust throughout this identity journey, from verification to auth. Again, at a B2C sort of journey there. But yeah, privacy preservation is another unique aspect. Again, complementary, fits well into that sort of end-to-end stack, which Ping are looking to build out. It seems to me more leaning into the B2C space there. But yeah, any comments on that? Any thoughts?
And Fabian over the team, I worked with them very closely, very early on while I was still at Gartner, and definitely very interesting technology. It was interesting for me in particular, right? So while I was in the identity team, I also overlapped into kind of data security, some cybersecurity stuff, but in particular, because I covered PKI and PQC, I also worked with some of our privacy folks and using a lot of the technology, right, for privacy preservation. So things like multi-party computation and you name it. So as I was covering a lot of this MPC stuff for kind of key management use cases, right, like your confidentiality, like your data protection and all that, and collaborating with some of our GDPR and privacy analysts for some privacy preservation tech. We just kind of get reached out for a briefing with this keyless company a long time ago, and then really diving into it with them when they became a client, so I could really take a look at their technology under NDA. And I was really impressed with what they were doing. And yeah, I think the SIFT acquisition was kind of an interesting one. And then I think it was really good for both parties that they, kind of were able to kind of separate themselves out from that. And personally, I thought Keyless was always ahead of the market, which, when you're ahead of the market, that can be challenging because you're out there trying to convince people that your technology is really the right path to go, right? But I think after they separated from SIFT, they were able to really kind of take control of their own kind of destiny. And I think with where the market is headed at this point in time, I think it's a really, really good move. And it's interesting with Ping. I mean, they've been on a tear as in terms of acquisitions. Big one being ForgeRock, and really a lot of their technology has been acquired over many years, right? I haven't, unless you correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen them natively develop anything. They've just been kind of pulling in technology, right? Which shifts a company from being innovative in themselves to being an innovation kind of what would be the right word, acquirer, right? You bring it in, consumer, right? and then kind of figure out the process and then get it into your own pipeline. Look at how you can converge it with products. I think my biggest question is going to be, I'm excited for the team. Just would like to see what that actually looks like, how it's productized, how it's commercialized, right? Is this an extra charge? Is it going to become native to Ping Fed, Ping One, right? All of that stuff. Very similar questions that you and I both had with the ForgeRock platform, right? Because there's definitely more than overlap. There's just different things there. So there's no overlap per se here. I think it's very additive technology, but how is it going to be commercialized? Are they going to have like a good, better, best offering and keyless tech is like the best, or that'll be interesting to see how it gets to market.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I guess the sort of two questions I would have to extend that a little bit would be, I think a bit like IGA, authentication is never done. Like you think authentication is done, and then you pull Lee back in. Like there's more authentication to do, and it's like you can talk about strong auth, and you can talk about passwordless and passkeys, and there's some extra thing to do with authentication. So I think it's a continual evolutionary aspect. And I think even if you have you make a strategic bet on one particular authentication modality, it's often the case organizations have 4 or 5 different authentication components for whatever reason, legacy, acquisitions. If it's B2C, different customer segments need different things, lots of flexibility there. You can't just shoehorn all customers to use one particular type. B2E is exactly the same. There's legacy, there's overlap, there's security usability concerns there. So I think authentication is never done, first of all. I think the second thing, though, it sort of extends your sort of pricing freemium, how do you use this thing question. But both Ping and ForgeRock have big marketplaces of integrations, and I guess you go onto the website there and look at the partnerships. There'll be lots and lots and lots and lots of authentication vendors. What does it mean for them? This is clearly going to be a priority now. If you're a Ping sales rep, you're going to be selling this to your existing customer bases. Now, what does that mean for other partners in there who deliver specialist authentication services? So that would be something I would be thinking about if I was a customer or a prospect. What does that mean? Does that overlap? Do they have preferential treatment, etc.? So it's a pragmatic one, I suppose. But I think
that's a good point.
There's a lot of no authentication systems are the same. We know this. There's definitely differences. I think this trust privacy thing is a real USP. I agree with you on that one. It's definitely different in the market. I think it does provide some core differences to what else is out there.
I think you raised a really good point actually on the marketplace. Ping has done a really good job in kind of building that out. And I still think that, as in terms of how they're going to go to market, what they're going to train their internal sales force to do, that's a different story. But just looking at it purely from like an analyst perspective, right? It's not unlike Microsoft, right? Like you and I both would get briefed by folks and they go, Microsoft is a competitor. I know that's great. You're playing with the partner directory. And it's kind of like, well, okay, what space are you in? And you might be like, oh, well, I don't know. I'm in endpoint security and Defender. We compete with Defender, or I'm in identity and we kind of compete with Entra ID. And it's like, they kind of are, but they're also just a part of the ecosystem as well. Right. They're a big part of what you need to plan. Right. It's like, hey, AWS has, a lot of different types of identity and security tools. You see them as a competitor. Do you see Google as a competitor with GCP, and now they have Wiz, and and it's like, you could argue that, but there are organizations that don't want to put all their eggs in one basket, and they're like, we'll use AWS for mostly our cloud services, but we want to use Hyper for authentication, and we love Hyper, and we never want to move away from it, but we use Ping as our IDP, or we use a lot of other Ping services over here, and guess what? We also use Okta. And we also use Transmit over here. I do think that there are organizations that I talk to all the time that they've got multiple vendors. They do know it's complex dealing with those multiple vendors, but for whatever reason, maybe they acquired another company, or maybe in a particular region, Ping works really, really well, but they've just found that like they don't want to do it in another region, and they're just happy using someone else in another region. So So, I mean, yeah, they're going to have to play that message well with some of these partners, but I think it's one of those list versus street type things. We'll see what happens on the street. If the partners feel like they're getting pushed out of deals, that will change. But I think if I were starting up an authentication company today, I'd still reach out to Ping to be like, hey, you're just out there, and there's a lot of people that have you as your customers with your IDP. Let's just work together, and hopefully Ping continues that, which I think they will. I think they'd be crazy not to, but I think they will. Okta does that, Ping does that. Any company of that size and magnitude, they recognize they're an ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is an ecosystem. Time will tell. A quick search on the partner thing there, 60 odd vendors. As you say, they're all doing different things. They're all going to be at different stages of the deal size there. All right, let's wrap up this week. A couple of last minute acquisitions to add into the mix, and we'll go with this one first of all to wrap us up. JumpCloud have acquired an organization called Breeze Security. So JumpCloud, for those who aren't aware, have been around for quite a while actually. JumpCloud, they're a sort of directory in the cloud, directory sort of SaaS, if you like. Good old directory services, again, storing identities, B2B, B2C. They've added in Breeze Security. So Breeze have been going around a couple of years from the sort of classic post-authentication, so ITDR space. So what's the message here? Look, we're looking at blind spot detection. So again, the identity provider, it is that pinch point. It is the front gate into core systems. Whether you have a keyless or an MFA or something in there, what happens after authentication is to be considered as well. So any sort of thoughts there? It seems complementary to me. I mean, Breeze, early in their journey, they're a couple of years in. It seems quite an early acquisition, early sale, but it seems to sort of fit the narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I think ITDR is another hot topic as well that I think is starting to, even though I think we have a notion of what it means, right? I think now we're starting to see not only have the market evidence and reason to invest in the technology, both from the practitioners and the vendor side, but I think now we're starting to see with JumpCloud, right? Here kind of demonstrating that. I mean, we also saw it was like Conductor One. We talked about CrowdStrike. Sophos also just launched kind of an ITDR service. Again, for me, looking at it from an attacker perspective, I'm thinking, yeah, finally we're starting to put these bits together. So that's my curmudgeon analyst brain being like, finally, if you're actually following the attackers, you would have done this a long time ago. But it's good to see that. It's really good to actually bring attention to it. So to me, I think this is good stuff that can bring more awareness, but bring more alternative solutions to help organizations solve it. In the end.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's I think that the post-auth stuff, behavior analysis, all of that stuff is vitally important. Devil in the detail here. There's a lot of ITDR vendors out there, and how you go about analyzing both individual, agentic, NHI, and other, comparing behaviors to yourself, to external threat intelligence systems, and other. Again, I spent a lot of time researching this for the future IAM book. And
I was going to say really, really quick, because I think it's going to apply to maybe a couple other things we're going to say. I think the big thing whenever you are a practitioner and you're looking at any of this technology, what is helpful, right? Because Simon, I know you and I do this as our analyst brains. It's like, what is the core of the company? Where did they start from, and what's the core, right? Sure, they may have done these acquisitions and added on these other bits and pieces, but they may just be like little arms at the end, but what is the heart of what they actually do, right? And so even though and the reason why I'm saying this is because there's just so much buzz around agentic AI, and you're talking about agentic AI, but you are a secrets management company, right? Just as an example. So at the end of the day, I always know the core of your business is managing and discovering secrets. And you just happen to maybe have integrations, or you built some interesting tools today with agentic AI. Not to say that you can't pivot and go to another direction, but pivoting is far harder than just doing additive stuff, but it doesn't take away from your core, right? So that's at least, how I always view the markets. Like, get through all the fluff of their marketing and go, what is the core of what they do? What's the true heart of what they do? And from there, then it's actually like, I've always found I've never been surprised when they've launched new things in their roadmap, or they talk about a direction that any company is going through. I always find that that's the most effective way to really cut down to what some of these companies do, in spite of all the buzz. But Simon, anyway, it just, as we were going through this, it just clicked just to bring that up.
Good advice. No, I thoroughly agree with that entirely. And just to, I guess, continue the ITDR theme, continue that sort of ITDR sort of narrative, if like another player has exited the market, as it were. This time, Imprivata, who was a long-standing, I guess they started Enterprise SSO from memory a long time ago, I think.
Yeah.
But they've been doing identity. So Fran Roche is actually their CEO, who was the ex-ForgeRock CEO. So they have gone and added a company called Veracint. I guess probably an intent to acquire, with the press release. Intent to acquire at some stage, company called Veracint again. AI-powered signaling, all of the good buzzwords there, but it's giving Imprivata that post-auth runtime analysis and detection, all the things we've been talking about there. But it is interesting, we're starting to see quite a few exits here in ITDR, whether it's the right time to go. I'm not questioning any of those things, good money on the table, but it is interesting is some of these existing players are thinking, actually, you know what, that is a gap for us. It is going to give us that extra security posture. Okta tried to pivot probably 2-3 years back and sort of add in this, got a security commitment aspect. Microsoft talk about their security commitment as well. So I think there's definitely that need, if you like, to have extra security capabilities within your identity stack. So yeah, another one. I don't necessarily think we need to dig into that in too much detail, but yeah. Any final comments?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Imprivata, I covered them closely, and then I remember when they really doubled down on healthcare. And they realized that they were competing horizontally, but I think when they looked at where they've been successful, it was in the healthcare space, and I think they've done a really good job there. But what's interesting with these ITDR acquisitions, to your point, I think one is when you look at the organizations that buy them, some of them, frankly, are suffering the innovator's dilemma, right? They're continuing to do what their core is, as we talked about. That's their core business. They can't reject that, because when they go to present that to the board, it's like, we can't cut into what's built us as a business, because they've built so much around it. And sometimes it's very difficult, depending on their operating and their stage. Imprivata is a very mature company under private equity, Thoma Bravo. So, they've gone out and acquired innovation here. But the big aspect, Simon, I just want to put a spotlight on, in fact, is the security mentality. Identity and access management companies, they, again, joiner, mover, leaver, productivity. At the end of the day, it's about getting someone productive, getting them online, hooking them up to their accounts, deprovisioning them at the right time, provision them at the right time, all that kind of stuff, right? But now we know that adversaries compromise identities, and they compromise the identity platforms in themselves. So that's why, I think we see the investment here. But I think the big kind of question mark for me is, it's not necessarily just a technology acquisition here. I think the organizations acquiring them have to realize that security is a fundamental, as a vendor, it's a cultural difference. There's a difference between selling productivity solutions and selling security solutions. Different buyers, and you mentioned it, different metrics. The metrics say it all at the end of the day. So for me, I think the jury's still out on some of these IAM companies truly converting to identity security companies. I'm not saying that they can't do it. I think, the analyst community, we need to be hard on them, because you can't just put it in your marketing material and you're like, oh, we're identity security. It's like, well, then why did you just have another breach? Or why did your customer just have another breach, right? So I think it's all good stuff. I think the cultural aspect, people, process, technology, And I think it's the people sometimes too that we have to take a look at here. So anyway, I'll stop.
No, it's good. Yeah, that's a good place to wrap it up. I think that was perfectly reasonable. I think time will tell. I think it's all of these vendors. Certainly the bigger guys, the legacy guys, have been around for a long, long time. It's difficult to innovate. It's difficult to build from scratch. If you've got partnerships, leverage them, test them out, and obviously just acquire at the edge of your core capabilities. It seems totally complementary. This one, I think there's no real surprises. And again, obviously, time will tell how that sort of, I guess, maybe gets rebranded or becomes part of the sort of Improvata platform there. But Dave, thank you as ever. It's been a long and meandering podcast, this one. We've covered a lot of stuff, a lot of acquisitions, which is perfectly exciting stuff, perfectly good to track. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Same with you, Simon, as always.
Safe travels with wherever comforters you are. Thank you to our audience for listening, wherever you are in the world. Keep your comments coming, keep your questions coming as well. This has been episode 65 of the Analyst Brief podcast. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.